It was just another late-night shift. At least, that's what I thought when I was called in to cover for one of the regular drivers who had fallen ill. I didn't mind. The pay was decent, and I was familiar with the route. It wasn't exactly the most glamorous job, but I liked the solitude of driving through empty streets, the steady hum of the engine, and the quiet of the night. The regulars didn't bother me much, and I could always count on the usual handful of passengers to keep things predictable. The bus itself was old, an old model that didn't quite fit in with the modern fleet, but it worked. It had its quirks. Sometimes the brakes squealed and the lights flickered in and out, but it was reliable. That night, though, the atmosphere felt different. Maybe it was just the late hour, but I had an odd sense of unease as I climbed into the driver's seat, adjusted my mirrors, and began my shift. The streets were unusually empty as I pulled out of the depot. I checked my watch, almost midnight. The city was quiet, too quiet. The usual bustle of late-night traffic was absent. My headlights cast long shadows as I drove through deserted streets, and for a moment, the silence outside seemed to settle over me like a heavy blanket. I checked the route, scanning the map quickly, and it seemed like everything was in order. The same stops, the same schedule. I didn't think anything of it at first when the first passenger boarded the bus. She was a middle-aged woman, dressed in a faded coat, with dark, hollow eyes and a tired expression. I nodded to her as she walked down the aisle, her footsteps soft against the floor. She chose a seat near the back, not saying a word. I didn't think much of it. Sometimes people just want their silence, and it was well past rush hour. I glanced at my rearview mirror to see if she had settled in, but when I did, I froze. The woman's reflection didn't match her movements. She was sitting, sure, but her face was turned toward the window. Her expression was blank, unnerving. The way she held herself, rigid, stiff, was unlike any passenger I had ever seen. I blinked and looked again, but she seemed normal now, just staring out the window as the bus rolled through the quiet streets. I shook my head, brushing off the strange feeling that crept up my spine. It was probably nothing, just the long hours getting to me. I needed to focus. But as I continued driving, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The next stop came up, and as I slowed down, I noticed something unusual. There was no one waiting at the stop, not a soul in sight. I kept going, but something gnawed at me. Why were the streets so empty? The whole city should have been bustling even at this hour. As I approached the next stop, I spotted a man waiting at the curb, standing still as if he had been there for a while. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, but he seemed out of place. His posture was too rigid, too perfect. His face was expressionless, pale. His eyes, though, glowed slightly in the streetlight, like they were reflecting something I couldn't quite place. I slowed down and opened the doors, trying not to focus on how strange he looked. He climbed aboard without a word, and I watched in the rearview mirror as he made his way to an empty seat, his steps heavy and deliberate. He didn't glance around, didn't acknowledge the other passengers. He just sat down, folded his hands neatly on his lap, and stared straight ahead. I forced myself to focus on the road again. The unsettling feeling wouldn't leave, but I told myself it was just my imagination. It had been a long day. The bus was empty now except for the strange passengers, 2 of them, and still no sign of more to come. As I continued my route, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled as the silence stretched on. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the soft, rhythmic swaying of the bus as it moved down the empty streets. The next stop came and went, But this time, I wasn't so sure I wanted to stop. There was no one there, just empty, dark streets. I glanced over my shoulder at the passengers. They hadn't moved, hadn't said a word, but I noticed that the woman's eyes were now turned directly on me through the mirror, and the man. He wasn't sitting still. He was leaning toward the aisle, watching me intently. I looked away quickly, focusing back on the road. My hands tightened around the wheel, and I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my neck. Something was terribly wrong. I glanced at the clock. 12:15 a.m. The shift should have been nearing its end, but the weight of the silence seemed to be pressing in on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not just by the passengers, but by something far more sinister. But that wasn't possible, right? They were just people. Strange, yes, but people. I told myself it was all in my head. I had been doing this job for years. Nothing like this had ever happened. I would finish my shift, get home, and put it behind me. The unease, the strange passengers, it was all part of the job. But deep down, I knew this was different. This wasn't just an odd shift, it was something far darker. I glanced at my rearview mirror again, this time looking for any sign of the normal world beyond. But when I did, the reflection I saw wasn't right. The bus, the passengers, none of it seemed real. The bus wasn't moving anymore. The lights were flickering and the road outside had disappeared. I wasn't driving down a city street anymore. The moment I realized the road had vanished beneath the bus, the panic hit me like a tidal wave. I slammed my foot on the brake, but the bus didn't slow down. In fact, it wasn't slowing down at all. The lights flickered again, casting long, stretching shadows across the seats, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't in control. The road outside the window was nothing but pitch-black emptiness. The streets I had just driven through, with the familiar streetlights and storefronts, were gone. I glanced at the dashboard. The lights on the bus were dimming, as though the energy itself was being drained. I reached for the radio to call in to dispatch, but the static was overwhelming. No words came through, just an endless, buzzing hiss. My heart began to pound as I looked back at the rearview mirror, only to see the two passengers, still seated, still motionless. Their eyes were now locked onto me, unwavering, as if they were aware of my every thought. I reached for the steering wheel, my hands clammy with sweat, and tried to turn the bus around, but the wheel felt stiff, like the vehicle was resisting me. The streetlights outside, if they even were streetlights, flickered and warped. It looked like a tunnel, a black void stretching endlessly in front of me. My breathing quickened, and I felt my stomach drop as a cold shiver ran down my spine. "Where are we going?" I muttered to myself, my voice shaky, as I stared at the empty darkness outside the bus. The woman, who had been sitting silently by the window, was now staring directly at me. Her face hadn't changed. Hollowed eyes, pale skin, expressionless, but her gaze was sharp, piercing, like she could see into my very soul. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "We're on the right path." Her voice was calm, almost too calm, and it sent a jolt through my body. I turned to look at her, my throat dry, but when I did, I saw that the man, the one who had been sitting motionless on the opposite side, was no longer just sitting. He was now standing, leaning toward the aisle, his eyes fixed on me with that same empty, unnatural stare. He wasn't speaking, but somehow I could feel his presence growing stronger. "You're the one driving." The man's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You can't stop now." I tried to answer, to say something, anything, but no words came. My throat tightened, and my chest felt like it was being squeezed by some unseen force. My heart hammered in my ears, and the bus continued moving, driving forward into the unrelenting void. I slammed the brakes again, this time harder, but the bus didn't respond. Instead, the whole vehicle seemed to shudder as if it was alive. The low hum of the engine changed, the sound warping, becoming distorted. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady myself, but the wheel felt even more unresponsive, like the bus was moving by its own will, not mine. "Where are we?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. My hand was shaking uncontrollably as I turned the key in the ignition, but it didn't work. The engine didn't start. The bus seemed to glide forward now, as if gravity itself was no longer a factor. I glanced out the window, hoping to catch sight of something, anything that would make sense of what was happening, but there was nothing. The darkness stretched on, the occasional flicker of a shadow passing by the window. The trees, the buildings, the world I had known, everything had vanished. There was nothing but emptiness. I felt like I was driving through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Suddenly, the man spoke again, his voice colder than before. "You've seen it now. The road is gone. There is no way back." I swallowed hard, my eyes darting between the two passengers. There was no way to reason with them, no way to understand what they wanted. They didn't seem human, but they weren't ghosts either. They were something in between, something that shouldn't exist. "What do you want from me?" I finally managed to choke out. My voice was weak, but the words spilled from my mouth like a desperate plea. The woman's hollow gaze softened just a fraction, and she spoke again, her voice quieter now, almost pitying. "We don't want anything from you. You were chosen to drive us, chosen to continue this journey. But the road is gone and you cannot return." The man's voice cut through, sharp and final. "The passengers will never leave, and neither will you." The air in the bus grew heavier, thicker, as if the very atmosphere itself was suffocating me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The silence that followed their words was maddening. The lights flickered again, casting eerie shadows across the seats. My eyes darted from one passenger to the other, trying to make sense of it all, but all I saw were their blank, lifeless expressions staring back at me. The reality of the situation began to hit me. The passengers were dead. They had to be. How could they be sitting here on this bus traveling with me if they were not? I opened my mouth to speak, to ask them what they meant by all of this, but no words came out. The engine's hum grew louder, the sound almost deafening now. And then it hit me. This wasn't a normal bus ride. This wasn't a normal route. I wasn't just driving these passengers somewhere. They were taking me somewhere. Somewhere I couldn't escape. I had become a part of the journey. But where were we headed? And why couldn't I wake up from this nightmare? The engine hummed louder, a deep, vibrating sound that seemed to resonate in my chest. The road ahead was still pitch black, and the bus glided forward as if it were no longer bound by the rules of the world. The steering wheel, once a tool for control, now felt like it was merely a suggestion, like I was being guided, not driving at all. I glanced at the passengers again, their faces expressionless, their eyes fixed and unblinking. The woman in the back remained motionless, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The man, now sitting rigidly, leaned slightly forward, his eyes locked on mine with that eerie, all-knowing gaze. His stare felt suffocating, like he could see right through me, peeling back layers I didn't even know existed. I swallowed hard and tried to speak again, my voice shaking with the weight of everything that had happened. Where are we going? Why can't I stop this bus?" The man didn't answer immediately, his gaze never leaving me. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold, but there was an underlying gentleness to it, as though he was speaking to someone who had already accepted their fate. "You can't stop. You're part of the journey now. We all are." I could feel my pulse quickening, my heart hammering in my chest. Part of the journey? What did that even mean? I had no answers, only questions, each one deeper and more terrifying than the last. And yet, some part of me knew that even if I did get an answer, it wouldn't make any sense. The rules had changed. Whatever was happening, whatever force was guiding this bus, had rewritten reality itself. "You're the driver. The passengers are waiting. We're all waiting." The woman's voice, low and soothing, echoed from the back of the bus. I hadn't seen her move, but her voice felt as if it surrounded me. It came from all directions, filling my head like a distant song. I blinked and looked at the rearview mirror. It was almost impossible to focus on the reflection. The bus felt different. The mirrors, the seats, the windows, they all seemed to warp, like I was looking at a reflection of something unreal. I couldn't escape the feeling that this wasn't just a bus ride. It was a journey into something far darker, a destination that had already been decided. The man's gaze flickered toward the front window, and in that instant, a chill shot through my body. For the first time, I noticed the faint glow of lights up ahead. It wasn't streetlights or headlights, but something else. A distant, strange illumination, pulsing like a beacon on the horizon. It didn't look like any town, any city, or even a road. It looked wrong, like it had been placed there for a reason, to guide us, to guide me. The destination is not what it seems. The man's voice was now low, almost reverent, like he was whispering a secret that was only meant for me to hear. It never is. A wave of nausea rolled through me. What did that mean? Where was this bus headed? And who were these people? These passengers, if they were even people? Were they spirits? Were they memories? Or were they something else entirely, something I could never comprehend? The bus lurched forward again, the headlights flickering, and the strange glow in the distance seemed to grow brighter, closer, as though we were hurtling toward it at an impossible speed. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every passing moment. It wasn't just the passengers now. It felt like the entire world around me was staring, waiting, as if I were being drawn into something far bigger than a simple bus route. I looked into the rearview mirror again, but this time I saw something else. A shadow. It wasn't just a flicker or a trick of the light. It was a shape, a figure, tall and indistinct, standing just behind the passengers. It was as if it was standing at the edge of the bus, watching from the periphery of my vision, waiting for me to notice it. I slammed my foot on the brake, but nothing happened. The bus didn't slow down. The shadow grew closer. I could feel its presence closing in, like a dark cloud filling the air. My hands clenched tighter around the steering wheel, but it felt like I was no longer in control. The bus was moving of its own accord. There is no turning back. The woman's voice floated forward again, a warning this time, her tone laced with something that felt far more ominous than before. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but my throat felt tight, suffocating. Every word I tried to speak stuck in my mouth, like my voice was being stolen from me. The shadow behind the passengers grew larger, closer, until it was almost tangible. It felt like it was feeding off the fear that was slowly swallowing me whole. I couldn't take it anymore. I looked away from the rearview mirror and turned my eyes forward, staring at the road ahead, if it could even be called a road. The strange light was almost upon us now, glowing unnaturally bright, and I could feel my pulse quickening again. I had to know what was at the end of this ride, even if it meant I wouldn't survive to tell anyone about it. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow was gone. The bus was back to its normal state, the interior once again quiet, the passengers still watching me, their eyes unmoving. But I could feel it. The presence was still there, lurking in the air, just waiting for its moment. The destination is the end of the journey. You'll know it when you see it. The woman's voice, calm and steady, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The fear that had been simmering inside me reached its peak, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was at the end of the road. I had to see this through. The bus continued to glide through the night, the road ahead stretching into an endless dark void. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white, but it didn't matter. I wasn't in control anymore. The road, the bus, even the passengers, they were all part of something far beyond my understanding. The strange, unnerving presence I had felt earlier was growing stronger with each passing second, suffocating me from all sides. The distant light ahead was now nearly blinding, casting everything around it in an eerie glow. It wasn't the soft, warm light of street lamps or headlights from another vehicle. No, this light was cold, unnatural, almost like it was drawing us in, pulling the bus toward it like a magnet. The bus didn't slow down, nor did I try to slow it. It felt like I was a passenger myself, along for the ride. The strange passengers, who, despite their unnatural stillness, somehow felt more real than anything else in this moment, remained as silent as ever. We're almost there. The woman's voice came again, her words as calm and steady as ever. I didn't even look at her. I didn't need to. Her voice echoed in my head, louder than anything I had heard before. The other passengers didn't move, didn't speak. They simply stared, their eyes fixed on me, unwavering. The growl from earlier, the one that had haunted me in the darkness, had faded, but the tension in the air had only increased. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, but I knew we were getting closer. I could feel it in my bones. We were nearing our destination. I couldn't look away from the light now. It consumed everything. My thoughts, my sense of reality, my understanding of time. The world outside the bus had disappeared entirely, leaving only the eerie glow that pulsed ahead. It was like the bus was moving through a tunnel, but the tunnel had no end. The road we were traveling on no longer seemed real. It felt more like we were drifting through an infinite void, suspended in time, trapped in some other world. And then, as if the light itself had swallowed us whole, the bus came to a sudden stop. I jolted forward, nearly slamming my head against the steering wheel. My hands shot out, gripping the wheel for balance, but when I looked up, I saw that the bus had come to a halt right at the edge of what I could only describe as an impossible place. The scene outside the windows was unlike anything I had ever seen. The world had shifted. There was no longer any sign of the city, the streets, or the familiar buildings. Instead, we had arrived in what looked like a vast, empty plain, an expanse of nothingness stretching out in every direction. There was no sky, no horizon, just a dark, endless void that seemed to consume the world itself. But there were buildings. Strange, twisted buildings, dark and towering, rising out of the ground like skeletal structures. Their windows were black and hollow, like empty eyes staring down at us from the dark void. The landscape was cold, barren, with jagged, cracked earth beneath the bus, as if the ground itself had been broken open. The air was thick and heavy, and for the first time I felt the weight of something ancient, something unfathomable, pressing against me. The woman's voice came again, though it didn't sound like it was coming from the back of the bus. It was everywhere, inside my head, inside the air, inside the very ground beneath me. You've arrived. Welcome to the end of your journey. My heart stopped. My eyes darted between the passengers, and for the first time I saw it. Something was different. The passengers were still silent, but there was a strange energy in the air. The woman who had been sitting at the back of the bus was no longer just a passenger. She had changed. Her skin was now unnaturally pale, and her eyes, once hollow, were now filled with a deep, endless darkness. Her form had shifted, becoming more solid, more real, as though she were no longer just a figment of the strange place we had entered. I wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but my throat was dry and no words came out. The man sitting across from her began to move, his body creaking as if it hadn't moved in years. He slowly stood up, his long, thin hands reaching for the aisle, his fingers unnaturally long, almost skeletal. His eyes locked with mine, and I could feel the weight of his gaze deep in my chest. "You've brought us here." His voice was raspy, like it hadn't been used in years. It sent a shiver down my spine. "And now, you'll stay." I felt a wave of terror crash over me, but I couldn't move. The words, the strange stillness, it was like I was trapped in a dream, unable to escape. I wanted to turn the bus around to drive away from this place, but it was too late. The doors remained shut, the engine dead. The passengers weren't just passengers anymore. They were something else, something tied to this place. "You're part of this now." The woman's voice echoed again, louder this time, filling the bus, the very air itself. "You cannot leave." The weight of her words pressed on me like 1,000 pounds, and as the realization hit me, I felt something stir within the bus. It wasn't just the passengers. It was everything, the air, the walls, the very fabric of reality itself. I was trapped. I looked out the window once more. The empty plane was now filled with figures, shadows of people, their faces hidden, their forms barely visible against the endless backdrop. They were walking toward us. Their movement was slow, deliberate, as if they were coming to claim what was theirs. The figures were coming for me. I had no choice but to stay. I couldn't breathe. The bus had become a prison, a vessel that was no longer moving under my control. The passengers, those hollow-eyed figures, were no longer simply riding with me. They were part of the journey, and now the journey had become something far darker than I could ever have imagined. Their stillness, their unblinking stares had transformed into an oppressive weight, and I could feel it pressing down on me, suffocating me. The figures outside were growing closer, moving toward the bus in a slow, synchronized pace, their forms emerging from the dark, empty void that surrounded us. They weren't walking in a normal sense. Their limbs jerked, unnaturally stiff as though they were being pulled along by invisible strings. Their faces were featureless, pale as if drained of life, their eyes empty hollows staring into the distance. And yet, they saw me. "They're waiting." The woman's voice, once calm and distant, now reverberated in my head, louder and more insistent. Her words, cold and final, pierced my mind like daggers. "We're waiting. You're waiting. You cannot leave, driver. You cannot wake from this dream." My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. but it didn't matter. The wheel felt cold beneath my fingers, as though I wasn't really holding it, just pretending to. The bus moved of its own accord, gliding toward the approaching figures in the distance. My thoughts raced as I tried to rationalize what was happening. This had to be some kind of dream, some kind of hallucination. There was no other explanation for this, but the longer I sat there, feeling the pulse of something dark in the air, the more I realized this was no dream. This was real. The figures were almost at the bus now. There were so many of them, their movements slow but inevitable, like shadows on the edge of reality, marching toward the inevitable destination that I, too, was a part of. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the familiar world I had left behind, but the mirror only reflected the emptiness. The streetlights that had once guided me were gone. The buildings, the city, everything was swallowed by the dark void. There was no turning back. I felt the eyes of the passengers on me again. Their gaze was like an anchor, pulling me deeper into this place. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to know what was happening, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. The bus was silent except for the constant hum of the engine and the eerie, distant whispers of the figures approaching. "You're the keeper now, driver." The man who had been sitting motionless on the other side of the bus spoke again, his voice carrying a strange authority, like it was commanding the very air itself. "You're part of the journey. They will never let you leave." I turned toward him, but his eyes were fixed on me, his pale face now stretched into something that could only be called a smile. It wasn't a smile of comfort or reassurance. It was something darker, something predatory. "You will drive forever." His voice was low, laced with a certainty that sent a wave of dread through my body. "Through the night, through the fog. You'll never reach your destination. We never do." I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull the bus over and run, but my body wouldn't move. The very act of resisting seemed to drain me of energy, as if something had latched onto my soul, holding me captive. The figures outside were so close now, mere inches from the bus, their hollow eyes watching every move I made. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. And then, something even worse happened. The first figure reached the bus, its hand reaching out and placing itself on the glass. The touch seemed to resonate with the bus, sending a ripple through the walls, like the very fabric of reality was bending around us. The glass didn't crack, but the figure's touch left a mark, a dark, oily smear that remained there, like a stain that refused to be erased. It moved along the bus, one by one, until every figure had placed its hand on the glass. The bus was no longer moving forward. It was standing still, suspended in time, surrounded by these silent watchers who seemed to be absorbing the very essence of the place. I could feel it then, the presence. It was everywhere, inside the bus, inside my body, inside my mind. It was waiting for something. It was waiting for me. The figures weren't just passengers anymore. They were guardians, protectors of the journey, and the journey had no end. I couldn't escape. But then, just as I was about to collapse under the weight of the silence, I felt a presence behind me. I turned quickly, and there, standing in the aisle, was a new figure. This one was different. It wasn't one of the dead passengers. It was someone, or something else. A shape in the darkness, tall and slender, with a face I couldn't quite make out, shrouded in shadow. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, its eyes glowing faintly as it gazed at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, in a voice that cut through the silence like a knife, It spoke. The journey is never over. You belong to us now. The figure's words were not a command, but a statement of fact. I was a part of this now. I was part of the bus, part of the passengers, part of the endless cycle. The destination was always out of reach. The journey was the destination, and I would never wake from this nightmare. The air in the bus grew heavier with every passing second. The figure standing in the aisle seemed to draw all the light toward itself, its presence filling the space. It wasn't just standing there. It was the bus. It was the journey. I could feel its energy seep into me, invading my very being. The walls of the bus seemed to stretch out, and the seats, the doors, the windows, they were no longer part of a regular vehicle. They had become parts of something ancient, something unknowable. The bus was not a machine. It was a vessel meant to carry souls, and now it had claimed me. I tried to speak, to scream, but the words were trapped inside me. I wanted to break free, to run, but my body wouldn't move. The figure's gaze was locked on mine, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. I could feel the weight of its stare as if it were looking into my very soul, watching my every thought, every hesitation. You will never leave. The voice echoed, deeper now, resonating within my chest as though it were coming from inside my own body. The sound of it made my skin crawl, the finality of its words suffocating me. You belong to the ride now, forever. The realization hit me with such force that I staggered back. I was trapped. I had been trapped the moment I accepted the job. The bus had never been just a vehicle. It had been a vessel for something far older, far darker, and it had been waiting for me, just as it had been waiting for the others before me. I glanced at the passengers, their faces still lifeless, but their eyes were all fixed on me now, unblinking, as if they were aware of me for the first time. Their empty gazes seemed to draw me in, pulling me into the void of the bus, into the endless ride. I couldn't look away. They were a part of this place, just as I was, just as I would be. There is no stopping it. The woman in the back spoke again, her voice now sounding less like a person and more like a collective chant, as though all the passengers were speaking through her. You've driven us all here. You've opened the path, and now it's yours to walk. The path. The words were like a mantra, and with each repetition I felt the weight of the journey grow heavier. The bus was no longer on a road. The landscape outside the windows had faded entirely. There were no streetlights, no city buildings, no signs of civilization. There was only the void, the same blackness I had seen when we first stopped. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, and yet I knew we were moving, not through space, but through time itself. The bus was lost, and so was I. I could feel the passengers, their presence surrounding me. They were still here, still part of this endless ride. Their bodies, motionless, hollow, were only a shell, but their souls, their essence, were now mine to carry. I could feel them in my mind, in my heart, slowly merging with me, becoming a part of me, just as they had become a part of this place. They were no longer individual people. They were passengers on this eternal journey. The man who had sat across from the woman now stood again, his movements jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by strings. He reached out to me, his hand stretching across the aisle, his fingers long and skeletal. I didn't want to reach for him, didn't want to touch the cold, lifeless hand, but something inside me pulled me toward it. I resisted. I fought, but the pull was too strong. It's too late. The voice spoke again, this time in unison with all the passengers, their voices like a chorus in my head. You're ours now. I felt the final tug, and my hand stretched out on its own. My fingers brushed against the man's cold hand, and in that instant, something inside me snapped. My vision blurred, my mind flooded with images of endless roads stretching into the abyss, of faces, of passengers, those who had boarded this bus before me and those who would board after me. We were all the same. We were all trapped. The ride would never end. The bus jolted suddenly, and I snapped my gaze back to the front of the vehicle. The world outside the windows was changing, distorting. The road we had been driving on was no longer a road at all. It was a swirling vortex of lights and shadows, twisting and turning in impossible patterns. The sky was no longer black. It was a swirling mix of colors, a sickly, unnatural hue that seemed to pulse with life, with force. I gripped the steering wheel, my hands shaking uncontrollably as the bus continued to drive forward into the void. There was no going back. There was no turning around. The destination had already been decided, and I had become a part of it. The passengers weren't just passengers anymore, they were the ones guiding me now, their presence suffocating, their eyes pulling me deeper into the darkness. You've seen it now. The woman's voice echoed in my mind, a final warning. You can't wake up. There's no place left to go. And I understood. I had been chosen. I had become part of this endless journey. The passengers, the bus, the road, all were bound to the same fate. We were all lost, driving through the dark, through time, with no end in sight. The road was never meant to be reached. The destination was the ride itself. And now, I would never escape.